When my son came to me the other day and said, "Father, I want to go into engineering," I sighed and said, "Son, you're wasting these perfectly good manure-sifting hands-on learning. You're a natural at diving in for scrap metal and bone. Why would you waste your biggest selling point?" I tell you this tale because over time the pain will heal. But not any time soon, as these games have reminded me of other times the potential was totally tossed aside. I'm Jules, the one per list wonder, and these are 7 more video games that totally wasted their biggest selling point. Number 7, becoming the classic Lara Croft, Rise of the Tomb Raider. After putting Lara through hell in 2013's Tomb Raider and chronicling her transformation from a helpless young woman into a genuine hero, Rise of the Tomb Raider was set to pick up with a version of the character closer to the confident, capable adventurer found in the original series. Unfortunately, that's not exactly what players got. For some reason, the devs had continued with punishment equals growth approach, which made sense for the first game but really didn't here. It was almost to the point of parody in this game and rendered any potential growth quite redundant. It's such a shame because the first game hit the ground running, but in this we were left wondering if the game was simply padding the character development to stretch out into a third game. Number 6, Black Mask isn't Black Mask, Batman Arkham Origins. Arkham Origins, while being one of the weakest entries into the Arkham series, was still a pretty great game, launch issues aside. And it was also really interesting to see the Dark Knight take on the Black Mask during his early years as a crime fighter. But the game truly dropped the ball when it was revealed that the Black Mask was none other than the one and only Joker. Okay, I mean, did we really need this reveal? And it wasn't exactly hard to spot either. However, the worst thing is that the devs promised that the Joker would only play a minor part in order to let the other rogues shine. While it makes sense to set up the Joker as a nemesis for Batman, it's a real shame to see him once again hog the entire show towards the end. Number 5, The Dark Zone, The Division. Look, there's no denying that a lot of what was promised in the early trailers for The Division didn't make it into the final release. Entire areas of the map changed, graphics were altered, and the story itself seemed to go through radical revisions. But the idea of playing in a huge dystopian sandbox with other players, risking your supplies against real-life enemies, always remained. And that experience was certainly present in the final game, but it was its own separate beast, isolated from the rest of the gameplay. PvP was only possible in The Dark Zone, which had its own currency system, loot, and styles of gameplay. There was some crossover with this idea with the rest of the title, but it wasn't a cohesive, seamless experience that was promised. Now true, many players weren't bothered by this and enjoyed the co-op element of the game. However, it's a real shame that this one feature that would have made it stand out was marginalized and pushed into the corner. Number 4, Frank being back, Dead Rising 4. God damn, this one still stings. I love Dead Rising, and off the record is still one of my favorite games, and say it with me kids, of all time! However, Dead Rising 4 was not a good Dead Rising game, and worst of all, squandered the concept of Frank West returning to the fore. And trust me, this was a huge selling point, even going so far as to go back to the original game's maul to get players invested in his new adventure. It was meant to be a game worthy of succeeding that which kicked off the whole affair, but ended up just being, well, a kick to the heart, as Frank himself was so terribly disappointing. A new voice actor didn't exactly help things, but the writing for him was terrible, making this reunion about as appealing as sitting on a belt sander. Number 3, Werewolf Hunting, The Order 1886. When the reviews for The Order 1886 came out, it wasn't the criticisms about the length or the shooting mechanics that were the biggest red flags, it was that the game apparently didn't even care about the werewolf combat that pre-release trailers were entirely based around. Fans still held on to hope though, because the developers surely couldn't squander a premise as cool as players lurking around Victorian England and waging a secret war against supernatural creatures, right? Well, unfortunately, that's exactly what happened, and now I'm left with your mum as the only hairy beast that I could look to stick hot lead into. There's my one per list, as the game instead centered around shooting boring old humans. Even worse was that when the bad boy doggos did show up, they all played exactly the same, with absolutely no variety. Great. No thanks. No thanks. Good. Happy. Number 2, 3 different campaigns. Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 was the game that was supposed to please every single fan of the iconic horror franchise, which, when you say it out loud, was always going to be an impossible task, wasn't it? The devs approached the problem with the idea of splitting the 6th game into 3 different campaigns. 4 if you count Ada Wong's secret missions. That's a great premise, but unfortunately the team didn't quite live up to their vision of presenting 3 different versions of Resident Evil in one complete package. Chris's story was the Gears of War clone that no one wanted, and also, side note, f*** you Piers and your stupid scarf. Jake was Dante from Devil May Cry, but without any charm, and I wanted to cover his personality in tar. And then we had Leon's campaign. Easily the best, as it was much more of a classic experience, but then the wheels just came off around the midway point when it all became about explosions and action sequences that felt like offcuts from Jake's experience. It was ambitious, and the way that these stories interacted with each other was admittedly cool, but there's no denying that the campaigns were nowhere near the quality they needed to be to back up Capcom's claims. And number 1, Hicks being alive, Aliens Colonial Marines. Let's just say what needs to be said here. This game f***ing sucks. It's a half-baked potato wrapped in tinfoil made of lies that was thrown into a microwave only to explode in a fiery public backlash. Yet you know what was more horrific than the way it looked and handled? What it did to the canonical story. After all, remember that this game is canon, and therefore with the return of Corporal Hicks undoes everything established in the cinema. Turns out that he wasn't actually dead, he was just having a rest. The excuse was piss poor, and it infuriated anyone who stuck with the game long enough to see the reveal. This was an iconic character being rehashed for a cheap pop, but only succeeded in coming across as an absolute waste.